Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I have started the webinar a little bit early this morning. Let me just pull up the presentation. Welcome to the ARPA Resources and Information Fair, and thank you all for joining us here this morning. This presentation is really a collaborative effort between the New Hampshire Municipal Association, the New Hampshire Association of Counties, Senator Jeanne Shaheen's office, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits, and the CDFA. We are in webinar mode here this morning, so if you could put your questions in the Q&A, that would be very helpful. We will do our best to address as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar, but as you put your questions in the Q&A, if panelists are able to address some of those questions throughout, they will. You will see the Q&A in the black toolbar. You've probably used Zoom before, so you probably know where that is, but please use Q&A and not chat for this webinar. And a recording of this webinar, along with the slides and additional information, will be sent out after the webinar is completed. You've probably all seen our webinar agenda, but we are starting off with some general information and resources. We will have opening remarks from Senator Jeanne Shaheen to kick us off. We will then have an overview from Gopher about the resources and information that the state is providing to non-entitlement units of government on ARPA. Then we will shift gears to talk about water, wastewater, clean water, and drinking water opportunities under ARPA with Peter Clark from Senator Shaheen's office, as well as Commissioner Scott from the Department of Environmental Services in New Hampshire. And then shift gears one more time to talk about community partnerships and how municipalities and counties can partner with various entities to better understand and better use their ARPA funds and their direct funding that they have received. We will have presenters from the CDFA, the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, the Granite United Way, and the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. Just to give you sort of an overview of what our goals are for this webinar, our first goal, of course, is 100% acceptance and use of the state and local fiscal recovery funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. We know that many municipalities are concerned about the various requirements that go along with the funding, the difficult sort of certification and compliance requirements, but we want to sort of show you today, this morning, that there are a variety of opportunities for using these funds. There are partnership opportunities, and there are ways to think outside of the box for using these funds to really maximize the impact that they can have on your community. We've brought together various stakeholders, various state agencies, organizations and nonprofits in the state to really show you big picture what's going on with ARPA funds in the state of New Hampshire and what collaboration and partnership opportunities may exist. And of course, our second goal this morning is really to get local officials and county officials excited about using these funds for investment in their community and in their residents. And with that, I would like to kick it over to Senator Jeanne Shaheen, who is here with us this morning to get things started. Senator Shaheen.
Thanks very much, Margaret, and thank you to the Municipal Association and to all the other sponsors for this morning's webinar. I'm really pleased that our office is able to join and that Peter Clark from our office is going to be presenting, and also on from my office is Madison Lightfoot, who many of you know, as well as Sarah Holmes, my state director, actually is not on today because she's on vacation, but we are here to provide information to you all. And that's one of the things we've tried to do since the American Rescue Plan was passed. So we are really here, like Margaret, like the other presenters, to see how we can be a resource for you. This is really a unique opportunity, I believe, to address not just the pandemic, but some of the underlying challenges that we face in our communities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. I had the opportunity on Friday to speak with representatives from the state and from the federal government to talk about childcare with childcare providers, because that's been such a huge issue. And childcare in New Hampshire is going to get about $77 million to try and help ensure that we have the places for families to drop off their kids where they can be safe and secure, and they can feel good about going back to work. So this is an opportune time to address some of those challenges like childcare that we have not been able to address over a period of years. And New Hampshire is going to benefit significantly from these American Rescue Plan funds. We're going to get about $1.45 billion. Of that, about $264 million is going to go to counties. About $110 million will go to non-entitlement communities, so mostly towns and cities, other than those 5 cities, Manchester, Nashua, Rochester, Dover, and Portsmouth, that are considered entitlement cities, excuse me, and they're going to get about 85, almost 86 million. So there are significant dollars, and as Margaret said, the challenge is to think about this as an opportunity to address what's happened as the result of the pandemic, but also to put in place, hopefully, a foundation in some areas that will allow communities to build on these dollars to be even more successful in what you're trying to do. I was over in Keene a couple of weeks ago with a roundtable from communities from Cheshire County, and we were talking about broadband, and it was convened by the county. And one of the things that they were talking about was their effort. They've hired a planner to work with them on how to use their funds. And one of the issues that came up in our broadband discussion was the need for technical assistance. And the county administrator, Chris Code, said, you know, maybe that's something we ought to think about doing with these funds, because it will allow us to help communities throughout the county. And this is not something we would normally be able to do in our budget. So this is the kind of thing I think we should be thinking about, being creative, taking advantage of the resources, so many of which are going to be on this call today. And again, anything our office can do to make it easier for you to provide information, that's what we've tried to do since we passed the American Rescue Plan, to get that information out so you know what's available, and so that today, hopefully, you'll get your questions answered so you know if there are concerns about spending those dollars. Because remember, as Margaret said, we want everybody to take advantage of the resources, because whatever you don't apply for is going to go back to the state, and it's going to get recouped, and it won't be available next year. So it's really important. There's an August 18th deadline to think about what you want to do to engage your communities. And we are all here to try and be as helpful as we can as you're thinking about the future. So again, thank you all. Thank you to all the presenters and all of the sponsors on the webinar.
Thank you so much, Senator Shaheen. And speaking of the August 18th deadline, I would like to bring up now as our first presenter of the morning, Eric Dahlberg from Guidehouse, to talk a little bit about what's going on for resources for non-entitlement units of government through Gopher. Eric.
Thank you, Margaret. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Eric Dahlberg with Guidehouse Consulting. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Guidehouse has been engaged by the Governor's Office for Emergency Relief and Recovery, GOFA, to help New Hampshire local governments quickly access those local fiscal recovery funds and to answer any questions you may have about how they may be used. I've had the opportunity to connect with many local government officials across New Hampshire already as the process has gotten underway and questions have come up. GOFA has set up a very straightforward, very user-friendly website for local governments in New Hampshire where you can do really 3 things. One, most importantly, you can take action by applying for those local fiscal recovery funds. As Senator Shaheen mentioned, and as Margaret repeated, your deadline for doing so is August 18th, which, believe it or not, is quickly approaching. So if you have not already done so, please take action by going to the site and getting the application process started today. It's very, very straightforward. The second thing you can do is get information on how the funds may be used. There's a variety of resources on the site, including frequently asked questions and other summaries that'll help you understand the various eligible uses for the funds. And then third, you can ask questions. You can submit questions straight through the site. They come directly to me and my team. We jump on them as soon as we can. We typically get back to folks within a business day or two. And most of the time, or as folks are willing, we're happy to hop on the phone as well and talk through any follow-up questions that folks may have, because this stuff can sometimes get pretty detailed. So happy to work with you through whatever channel is works for you to get your questions answered as quickly as possible. So next steps. Again, if you haven't already, I want to repeat, please access the site. There's a link right on the slide there to start the application process before August 18th, that big deadline that's approaching. There is a little bit of information that you'll need to gather in advance of formally submitting your application. So my recommendation is to go to the site first to understand what pieces of information you need to collect ahead of time, so you can subsequently gather everything, then go back to the site and apply all in one step. The second thing you can do once you apply, and again, if you haven't done so already, is start to identify your community's needs and priorities and how they may fit into the eligible uses for those local fiscal recovery funds. Start to think about projects for which you have a need, or programs that you'd like to get up and running using those dollars. Third, explore whether there are opportunities for coordination of projects with the state. The state is in planning stages for, the state is receiving its own allocation of funds under ARPA, under the American Rescue Plan. And the state is in planning stages for several projects to do important things like improve broadband access, assist homeowners, and support industries that have been impacted by the pandemic. So you may wish to coordinate with the state as those programs get up and running. And there'll be more to come on those projects as they come out of planning stages. So those are our three next steps that we recommend. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have either live today via the Q&A or in follow-up. Looking forward to talking with you anytime.
Thank you so much, Eric. And if folks have questions for Guidehouse via Gopher, you can put those questions in the Q&A, as Eric mentioned. Of course, you can also contact them directly through the Gopher website, which has a My Inquiry tab, and will send questions to Gopher or to Guidehouse staff to assist you in understanding the application and also a general understanding of uses of the funds. So thank you, Eric, so much for joining us here this morning. And if you'll stay on the webinar, folks may have questions in the Q&A as we move through the presentation this morning.
Sure.
I want to thank you. I want to shift gears a little bit here to talk about first water and wastewater, and then clean water and drinking water opportunities with the state and local fiscal recovery funds. First up on this topic to talk about water and wastewater infrastructure opportunities is Peter Clark from Senator Shaheen's office. Peter.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much, Margaret. Again, my name is Peter Clark from Senator Shaheen's office, and I wanted to start out this portion of the webinar just to give a little bit of information about water and wastewater opportunities. One of the express uses of American Rescue Plan state and local government funds, as written in the legislation, is that communities can use funding for necessary investments in water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure. the interim final rule published by the Treasury gives more information, aligning eligible uses of funds with the guidelines of the EPA's Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund guidelines. If a project would qualify in the wide range of types or categories of projects that would usually be eligible for those two state revolving funds, then the COVID state and local fiscal recovery funds can be used for these projects as well. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but a few examples of projects that would likely be eligible include water treatment, transmission and distribution projects, decontamination, construction of publicly owned treatment facilities, non-point source pollution management, water reuse projects, and water conservation projects. The interim final guidance also explains that these funds can cover costs incurred for eligible projects planned or started prior to March 3rd, 2021, provided that the project costs covered by the funds were incurred after March 3rd, 2021. So even if you've already started a project before March, as long as those costs are incurred after that date, you can still use American Rescue Plan funds for that project. And funds must be obligated by December 21st, 2024, but projects don't necessarily need to be completed at that time. The period of performance runs until December 31st, 2026. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Scott from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and he will say more on some of the programs that the state has available.
Commissioner Scott, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, everybody. I'm still looking for myself on the screen, but I guess that's not necessarily. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. So again, as Peter mentioned, first of all, I want to thank the Senator before I get too far ahead of myself on all the work she's done. We're watching very closely the infrastructure bill because I think that'll be a nice tie-in, the results of that, hopefully, to the American Relief Plan Act monies that I'll be talking about here momentarily. So as you're probably aware, and as alluded to, the state government portion of the ARPA funds allow broadly, very broadly, I apologize, are intended to plug revenue shortfalls in state government caused by the COVID epidemic. But also that there's a caveat at the end of the qualifications, which again, as Peter alluded to, talk about necessary infrastructure improvements in water and sewer infrastructure. So again, as mentioned, that same law tasked the U.S. Department of Treasury to issue guidance on eligibility, how those funds can be used. So true to form, I love part of the government, so I can feel for this. The Treasury ended up issuing what's called interim final guidance with more to come on the use of the funds. So that's so there's a little bit of a play in what ultimately will be allowed for, but broadly speaking, as Peter Clark mentioned, the eligibility requirements we are sure of based on that guidance is that if a project meets the same criteria as our state revolving loan fund projects, then these programs funded out of this would also qualify. That's not to mean they must be projects that are currently being funded or will be funded out of the state revolving loan fund. So a little bit of background on that. The state revolving loan fund program is geared towards drinking water and clean water. Clean water, for those who are the uninitiated, is wastewater, stormwater projects, and that's a low interest loan program. And depending on the median household income of the area being loaned at, can include loan forgiveness. So with that, and trying to anticipate and be ready for our this eventuality of being able to use federal funds on our annual solicitation that staff has done for pre-applications for the state revolving loan fund, we also signaled that this would be our understanding was the state revolving loan fund eligibility would also be the criteria for any federal funds through ARPA. And this would be a great way to signal your desires. So with that, we have an unprecedented number of pre-apps at the state level for the state revolving loan funds. We received 406 applications for just about $1 billion for both clean water and drinking water SRF, which includes the desire for grants from ARPA monies. So in June, the state moved the first tranche of this type of money to the Department of Environmental Services. We received $50 million as a start, and that allowed us to do, among other things, to start to build some capacity here in the department to administer this. And having said that, I want to just reiterate again a little bit what Peter said. So the funds must be obligated by December 24, and the projects need to be 100% complete with all the money spent by 2026, December 2026. That sounds like a long time, and it's certainly better than for those who remember ARA. But it's if you haven't really, if these projects are notional, especially the clean water projects, that's not a lot of time to complete these projects. So what we're anticipating as a department, and we're still working with Senate and House leadership, as well as the governor's office, on what's coming next, which will likely be a considerably more amount of the ARPA funds to the department for these projects in the coming months. We're still ironing out a little bit of the details. We're close to being able to go public with that. But what we're looking at notionally is basically having funds available for the traditional type of projects, as Peter mentioned. He gave some examples. But also, so again, that would be pipes in the ground for water systems. That would be treatment facilities. That would be upgrades and renewal of existing facilities. But also, we are looking at doing a separate, most likely a separate solicitation for more disadvantaged communities. We're cognizant that just because you didn't submit for under the SRF, which is a loan program, especially for some of the drinking water systems, we're cognizant of that perhaps you are leveraged and not able to do loans, or you have other loan venues, or you bonded. So we'll probably do a solicitation for those type of projects. We are also looking at, for those who aren't going to be ready for a project that can be in the ground by 2026, we were looking at also some grants. This is all grant money, by the way, for things like asset management and planning for your system, energy audits, water loss audits. Effectively, what we're looking at is if you're not able to meet the 2026 opportunity, I think there's hopefully an opportunity to help you with some planning and perhaps some design work to set you up in the future, which I'll talk about my hopes in a minute. We're also looking at setting up a grant program for cybersecurity for these systems also. So more to follow on that. And then we also, I mentioned the ARPA guidance. There are a lot of work to be done on dams, so it's unclear whether that work will be able to be done with ARPA funds. However, we do have some relatively late-breaking guidance from EPA on dams that are effectively holding reservoirs for drinking water, and those do fall squarely under the criteria. So there's a lot of potential work that could be done. I mentioned the future, so again, thanks to the good work of Senator Shaheen and others, we're hopeful about a infrastructure bill. We're hearing rumors of a fairly large increase in the SRF for the future, the state revolving loan funds. And again, there's a fair amount of loan forgiveness. So we'll see what comes out of all that. But I think there's a possibility that we could have funding opportunities moving forward. So for those projects that aren't quite ready yet to meet the criteria under ARPA, perhaps there'll be a way to be positioned for the future. But in any case, my guidance to you all is to the extent you have projects that are in the design phase, projects you've already talked to us about. We also have other opportunities through the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund available to you, is to try to leverage as much as possible in order to make projects happen. I think our desire would be to have as many multipliers as possible to have this money go and be as effectively as possible. A final thing I'll mention is for water contamination. PFAS has become the four-letter word in this state and others for water contamination. So we also have, I don't believe the governor's his desk yet, but House Bill 271 in the state also provided for the use of some of the ARPA repayment funds. So there's still timeframes, but not the SRF eligibility requirements. So we will be getting funding through those funds also after the bill passes. And that will allow us a little bit more flexibility for those communities who have been impacted by PFAS contamination. In particular, one of the concerns that drove this is under SRF, it's unclear if you don't currently have a drinking water system. So I'm talking about residential wells that have been impacted by water contamination, and we want to put the infrastructure in to get them connected to public water systems. It's unclear of helping those residential wells get connected, for, as an example, would qualify. So this House Bill 271 funds, which again would be administered by the department, would be used to augment the already last bienniums. We received $50 million in loan funds for PFAS. This would allow a amount of money for grant programs for those type of situations above and beyond the regular ARPA money that I've just been talking about. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions to the extent I can. A lot more to follow with the agency as we move forward. I expect we'll be getting again larger amounts of money in the coming months through the fiscal committee. The ARPA funds that are coming to the state came in two large tranches. So there's a second tranche, if you will, of funds coming next year. So I expected some kind of dispersal similarly, is my understanding, when that money's come also. So a lot more to follow, a lot of great opportunities for the state, and happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Scott. As you know, water and wastewater projects continue to be extremely important to municipalities, and NHMA has already been hearing a lot of questions from cities and towns about using their direct state and local fiscal recovery funds for projects related to clean water, drinking water, stormwater, PFAS remediation, and all things related to water. Thank you so much for joining us and for this information. I know the state is still developing its program, which is great, and we will continue to keep tabs on that and communicate with DES. If attendees have any questions for the commissioner or any other panelist, please put them in the Q&A, and we will try to get to questions as we move towards the end. Thank you again for joining us, Commissioner.
Thank you.
We are going to shift gears a little bit here, and we're going to sort of move into the second portion of the presentation, which is to talk about community partnerships, partnering with nonprofits, partnering with other entities, and taking collaborative approaches to use of state and local fiscal recovery funds from the American Rescue Plan. And to kick us off, we have Kevin Peterson from the CDFA. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Margaret. Thank you, and welcome everybody. I'm Kevin Peterson. I'm the Director of Economic Development for CDFA, and our Executive Director, Katie Easterly Marte, is on the call as well. I think it's fair to say that the American Rescue Plan resources provide a really unique opportunity for New Hampshire municipalities to consider investments in projects that can build the long-term resiliency and economic well-being of all of our communities, including infrastructure, affordable housing, downtown revitalization, and other sorts of creative economic development approaches. Leveraged, as Commissioner Scott just said, with other state and federal resources that are currently available through CDFA and other partners, the ARPA dollars will help us, enable us basically to work together to address many of the critical needs that are highlighted and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I want to provide you with a couple of examples from 3 different New Hampshire communities, and starting with infrastructure. Infrastructure investments help communities to take that critical first step toward downtown revitalization and strong economic growth. A great example is Littleton. The town invested in sewer upgrades and in stormwater infrastructure in the River District, which is behind the downtown Main Street, enabling the completion of a downtown river walk and expansion of several businesses along the river. These investments were a key component in the community's larger efforts over the past several years to revitalize a portion of the downtown that faces the river that had been long neglected. CDFA's investments of state and federal resources helped to resolve the infrastructure challenges, and that paved the way for improved living conditions for area residents, expanded employment opportunities, and reconnecting with this beautiful and historic stretch of the Ammonoosuc Riverfront. Then last year, as a continuation of the work that Littleton is doing, we awarded tax credits to the town to support the creation of Riverfront Commons, which is on the opposite side of the river from downtown. And from basically the photo that you see on the right is where the Commons is located. This economic development and recreation project is expanding downtown public parking. It's creating a connection to an existing rail trail. It's establishing a welcome center and providing a permanent home for a farmer's market that supports 45 small businesses in the Littleton region. So together, these projects serve as a great example of a strategic public-private collaboration that brings together local, state, and federal resources to basically help Littleton achieve the vision that it's set for itself for the future. Next slide. The need for affordable housing in New Hampshire, as we all know, has been dramatic, and it's only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And there are provisions within the American Rescue Plan for local governments to invest in specific negative economic impacts of the pandemic, like affordable housing. Communities will need to collaborate with local partners in many cases to address this challenge, such as for-profit developers and with the network of nonprofit housing developers across the state in order to meet local housing needs. Now, this type of collaboration is already happening in many places, including in the Upper Valley, where multi-layered support for Twin Pines Housing, which is the regional nonprofit housing developer, helped them to meet critical housing needs in the Upper Valley region. The City of Lebanon and Twin Pines Housing partnered to build new apartments on Tracy Street in West Lebanon for low and moderate income residents. This 29-unit development is close to public transportation. It's near employment opportunities, and it's right next to community facilities like the library. And it's the first net zero affordable housing project in the state. So it really crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. Another project in Lebanon that Twin Pines has recently completed working with the city is called the Village at Crafts Hill, which CDFA actually supported as well with state tax credits and with federal community development block grant resources. That investment helped significantly to improve the quality and function and energy efficiency of several hundred aging apartments. And it helped Twin Pines to build a new community center. And just as an example, the residents there used to have to get in their car and go down the hill to the local laundry to do their laundry. They now have a laundry right in the community building, and that helps people be able to access, basic human needs right there in their own backyard. And finally, next slide, CDFA is committed to helping communities revitalize their downtowns and village centers where economic development can have a significant impact. And New Hampshire has a long legacy of historic, mill-oriented, often water-oriented downtowns. So the opportunities here are significant. We have a multi-year relationship with the city of Franklin. Over the course of several years, CDFA has invested in facade improvements, affordable housing, energy efficiency, the capacity of area nonprofits, and specific economic development projects. The most recent of which is to help a public-private partnership that is creating the first whitewater park in New England, right in downtown Franklin. And we had a wonderful groundbreaking for that project last week. CDFA funds leverage millions of dollars of additional public and private investment. And the investments are paying off. They're attracting new businesses to the downtown. They have additional private housing development that's converting an old mill to market rate housing. They're seeing expanded tourism and a growing tax base in one of New Hampshire's most challenged former mill towns. And we're actually seeing the results of those investments through our community progress indicators. We've been able to actually track how the socioeconomic needle has moved positively overall in terms of the well-being of Franklin and its residents. American Rescue Plan funds provide communities with this once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in traditional types of economic development, such as water and sewer infrastructure and housing, but also to take advantage of creative approaches, such as working with small businesses on facade improvements, streetscaping to improve a neighborhood's environment, or enhancing outdoor spaces for COVID-19 mitigation, such as using part of a street as an outdoor patio for a restaurant. And last slide, please. So CDFA has been here for 30 plus years, and we're absolutely ready, willing, and able to support your community economic development initiatives with a wide variety of resources to help leverage what ARPA can provide, including planning funds, tax credits, community development block grants, pre-development and clean energy loans, and technical assistance to help you find the right funds, as well as liaison with other state and federal funders. So for more information, we invite you to contact any member of our team, and we'll start the process, and we look forward to working with you over the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you for sort of getting people excited about the opportunity to collaborate and also to reach out and communicate with CDFA about what opportunities exist to really leverage the local fiscal recovery funds and make the needed investments in New Hampshire communities. If you have questions for Kevin, feel free to put them in the Q&A. Next up on our agenda is another very important topic, the Homeowner Assistance Fund. And we have Andrew from the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for having New Hampshire Housing here, inviting us to talk about the Homeowners Assistance Fund. It's an important program that we do want all towns and communities to be aware of, where the program's at, and how residents in their community will be able to access it. So thank you. First slide, or next slide, please. So just to kind of give you, everybody who's participating, an overview, these are funds that may be available for homeowners in your communities. And I just wanted to, this is right from the Treasury guidance. So this is part of the American Rescue Plan. There was funds carved out. Treasury is overseeing, and it's funds to mitigate financial hardship associated with COVID by providing funds to eligible entities for the purpose of preventing homeowner mortgage delinquency, defaults, foreclosures, loss of utilities, home energy services, and displacement of homeowners experiencing financial hardship after January 21st, 2020. And that's through qualified expenses, which we'll go over. So next slide, please. Thank you. So big picture, the American Rescue Plan provided $10 billion in funds nationally. New Hampshire is allocated $50 million, which is what's called the small state minimum. So there's going to be $50 million worth of funds that can be allocated to homeowners who experience financial hardship from COVID. The end date of these funds is September 30th, 2025. Important date to note, currently, Treasury has guidance that by July 31st, a state must either submit a plan to Treasury on how these funds will be administered, or the date they will submit a plan. New Hampshire is looking to have that date of submitting the plan, August 30th. Next slide, please. So just big picture again, the state of New Hampshire is the official recipient of the funds. New Hampshire Housing is not the one receiving the funds. Gopher is overseeing the Homeowners Assistance Fund for the state, and the state is contracting with New Hampshire Housing to, one, create a plan and create an administrative structure. In some other states, there was what's called hardest hit funds, and so those states already had systems in place to allocate funds similar to this. New Hampshire was not a hardest hit fund, so we're really building this from the ground up. And then, perfect. So eligible homeowners, 1 to 4 units, single family homes must be owner occupied. There is a purchase price limit, $548,000. Again, must have experienced COVID hardship on or after January 21st. And then there are income limits. It's also important for towns to know that even if someone meets the general criteria, in the end, the servicer of that loan may have additional criteria that may make someone ineligible. Next slide, please. So the income limits are, there's prioritization in the Treasury guidance around the income limits. 60% of the funds must go to households at or below 100% of the area median income. The high limit is you can actually go up to 150% of the area median income. So 100% is around 62,000 for a one-person household, up to 88 for a four-person household. If we can get into the higher income limits, that's up to 92,000 to 130,000 roughly. Next slide. There's also prioritization of those funds going to what is referred to as socially disadvantaged individuals. And it's basically someone who's been disadvantaged socially, and they specifically call out Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asians. So within the plan that we will be submitting to Treasury, we need to prioritize funds to socially disadvantaged. Then next 60% of those funds must go to households at or below 100% of AMI, and then up to 150% of AMI. Next slide. The funds can be actually used for quite a wide range of services. Although our plan may not roll out all these services, it may be more of a phased in of what expenses can be covered, but certainly those at risk of foreclosure, at risk of displacement from their home would be first in the prioritization. So payments for mortgage interest, principal, taxes, we can pay taxes out of this. Utilities, gas, home energy, condo fees, internet, homeowners insurance, and then anything else that the Treasury will deem approved. What's important for towns and communities to know is that taxes can be paid out of this. They do have to have had a financial hardship on or after that January 21st, 2020 date. What is unclear is if these funds can be used to pay taxes prior to that date. And that's where we're really waiting for a lot of guidance from Treasury to tell us, you know, can you pay for eligible expenses before that date, which certainly could help many of your town residents if they're past due in taxes. Next slide, please. So big picture, this is a significant opportunity of funds to the state of New Hampshire to help homeowners at risk. There are also funds within this for counseling and legal services to help homeowners. And there's funds for outreach, but I think the biggest outreach will come from at the local level, the grassroots level. So at the town level, if you have anyone now or when the plan is submitted, if you have anyone who is struggling with taxes, with mortgage, with utilities, have them call 211 or go to homehelpnh.org. And homehelpnh.org was where we had asked people to go to, and then they are directed to a free housing counselor. And then when this program comes out, they'll be directed to how to access these funds. Next slide. Challenges that we do have for submitting the plan is certainly clarity in the guidance from Treasury. They gave some very general guidance. As I had said, the plan or a date we're going to submit the plan is due July 31st. At this point, Treasury still hasn't released the template that they want these plans submitted on. So there's all likelihood this will be pushed out to August 31st for that date. And then data is hard to come by. As you know, there is a foreclosure moratorium right now. It does end July 31st. So it's hard to know what the need is when a lot of these servicers are unable to foreclose on individuals. Next slide. Here's the general timeline right now, just so everybody knows, because I think there's a lot of information going out in the news right now about the homeowners assistance funds. Again, New Hampshire needs to create a plan, submit it to Treasury. Treasury needs to accept that plan. So currently our date is to submit the plan to Treasury by August 30th. And then hopefully within 30 days, Treasury will approve the plan, and then we would be ready to launch the program. Next slide. There's my contact information. I believe Margaret's going to provide copies of this presentation. There's links to the Treasury guidance. The biggest thing I think is if you have homeowners that are struggling, tell them to call 211 or outreach on the web through homehelpnh.org. And if you have the ability to just link that on your web pages, that would be fabulous. And thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that overview. I know it was a very quick overview of a very big and important program, but I think it provided attendees the basic idea and, of course, the important contact information for any residents who are struggling so that they can take advantage of the program. So thank you again for joining us. And yes, the presentation as well as the recording of the presentation will go out within a couple days of the presentation. So you'll all have the slide with the contact information as well as the recording. And so without further ado, turning it over now to Patrick Tufts, the president and CEO of Granite United Way, to talk about nonprofit partnership opportunities. Patrick.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Just want to thank everyone for giving us a little bit of time on today's agenda. Our presentation will be pretty short, and if you want to go to the next slide, Margaret, I'll just kind of walk through what local United Ways can do. A lot of folks don't know that United Ways partner very frequently with the state of New Hampshire, sometimes with towns and municipalities, on resiliency funds at the local level. We have been doing quite a bit of this over the last couple of years. So if your town or municipality decides that you want to address health and human service issues at the local or grassroots level, I'd encourage you to reach out to myself or your local United Way. You don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. We do a lot of basic needs support at the local level. We've already identified networks of local not-for-profit agencies who are doing great work. We have the ability to work with them very quickly and efficiently. What we're starting to see pop up all across the country as communities try to figure out how they're going to deal with the ARPA funds are these ALICE funds, which focus on getting funds to agencies that address the needs of asset-limited, income-constrained, and employed households, which are all indicators of people that are under stress right now in New Hampshire and across the country. Also with an additional focus on financial stability of those households and supporting the care and education of their children. What we found at United Way and is getting money out at the grassroots level can be very complicated for an entity that doesn't have a tremendous network already in place. We have a couple of examples of doing this work over the last couple of years. We did serve as the distributor of funds for the New Hampshire COVID Relief Fund, where we were able to provide financial assistance to 5,000 citizens across the state through 6 hubs that we built, which did all the networking and connectivity at the local level. We also worked with Gopher in 2020 to subcontract with recovery organizations all across the state to distribute Gopher funds out to them. And most recently, we have been working with 100 overnight camps all across the state of New Hampshire to make sure that they get the funding that they need to test and vaccinate their campers and their staff. Again, the point being, it doesn't need to fall necessarily on a municipality or a town to get into a situation where it has to subcontract with dozens or even up to 100 local not-for-profits. Your local United Way already has those relationships in place. We can be a facilitating organization or an asset to you if you decide to address health and human service issues with your ARPA funds. Next slide, please. Again, creating local hubs, individual financial assistance, issuing RFPs, distributing funds, doing the follow-up. These are things that we've done in New Hampshire for nearly 100 years. The networks are already in place. We're a very localized organization. We have relationships with 800 not-for-profits across the state. And I know 211's been mentioned a couple of times. We're also the administrator of 211, which gives us a great insight as to what the citizens of New Hampshire are calling about on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. So we would be able to work with you to let you know exactly what people in your communities are seeking assistance for. Sometimes we might think that people are struggling with a certain issue and it's not really what they're calling for help about. We did process 350,000 calls for help in the last 12 months, and they really run the gamut from everything you've heard about today, rental assistance, foreclosures, behavioral health, mental health issues, substance misuse issues, childcare issues. So there's a lot of people in New Hampshire are hurting and they're looking for assistance. So my contact information is on the next slide. If anybody's interested in talking with the United Way and potentially partnering to work to get funds to not-for-profit organizations, we'd love to have the conversation, see if we can make the process easier for you. I know the not-for-profits would appreciate it, and so does your local United Way. So I was going to be short and sweet, Margaret. Unless there's questions for me, I'll mute.
That was short and sweet, but perfect, because as you mentioned, one of the opportunities for the state and local fiscal recovery funds is sharing funds with local nonprofits. And so for cities and towns looking for good ways to use their funds to the benefit of their residents, partnering with nonprofits like Granite United Way is a real opportunity here with these funds. So thank you so much for being here. And we will have another presenter from Granite United Way in a moment. But next up, we have Phil Sletton from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for your time this morning. Again, I'm Phil Sletton. I'm a senior policy analyst at NHFPI. NHFPI is a nonprofit independent policy research organization that's based in Concord. We look at fiscal policy at the state level and also so budget and revenue policy, as well as the state economy, particularly with how it impacts and how policies impact Granite Staters with low and moderate incomes. So I want to talk to you a little bit this morning about assistance in the American Rescue Plan Act to households in New Hampshire. And if you could move to the next slide, please, Margaret, that would be great. So where are these households now? Well, New Hampshire Employment Security estimates that about 26,000 fewer Granite Staters were employed in May of 2021 than in January of 2020, unadjusted for seasonal variations. So that's a 3.5% drop over a period during which we would have expected there to be job growth without the pandemic. So the actual deficit in a world without the pandemic would likely be larger. These data, which you see on your screen, are high frequency private sector data analyzed by researchers at Harvard and Brown universities. And they suggest that these job losses are heavily concentrated in low wage work. High wage work has actually grown in New Hampshire since January 2020 based on these data, while middle wage work has returned to about pre-pandemic levels, and low wage work was still about 25% lower as of the beginning of May. So again, the same period from those New Hampshire Employment Security data. So one other component is that these high frequency data, which are pulled from several sources, may reflect a little bit that low wage workers may be working one part-time job instead of 2 or 3, perhaps because of childcare duties or other concerns regarding the virus. These data and other data sets suggest that people who went into the crisis with low incomes and limited resources were much likely to have lost employment income and still face lower incomes even as the pandemic has eased. If you could go to the next slide, please, Margaret, that would be great. Thank you. So we also have other data that continue to suggest significant hardship. These data that you're seeing now are household pulse survey data from the US Census Bureau. This survey began during the pandemic, so unfortunately we don't have pre-pandemic data for direct comparison. but the bars show percentages of adults in New Hampshire responding that paying for usual household expenses, such as mortgages or rent, car payments, student loans, medical expenses, or food, was somewhat or very difficult. The labeled vertical lines are the 2 federal aid packages that were enacted over the course of this question in this survey thus far, one in December and the other being the American Rescue Plan Act in March. The federal aid packages, which included aid to households, did appear to help reduce material hardship some following their enactments. However, the most recent data still show that about 1 in 4 households in New Hampshire, or 1 in 4 New Hampshire adults reported that paying for usual household expenses was somewhat or very difficult, suggesting that hardships are ongoing for many of the state's residents, even as more people are vaccinated and the economy improves. Next slide, if you would, please. So there are some direct benefits, and some of you know about these or have probably already experienced them in many ways, that come from the American Rescue Plan Act and then go to households. One is the economic impact payments that we saw largely earlier in the year. This is generally $1,400 per person for low and middle income households and was a one-time transfer. It does require some action on the part of households in most cases, either filing taxes in the past or filing a notice with the IRS that you may be eligible. There's also enhanced subsidies for health insurance on the individual marketplace for those individuals and households that are buying health insurance through the individual marketplace exchanges. In 2021 and 2022 is when these enhanced subsidies are in effect. So this reduces premiums for people who are making under 400% of the federal poverty guidelines in terms of their income. This also actually eliminates premiums for certain benchmark plans for those who are making under 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, so in poverty or much closer to it. And premiums were capped for those making over 400% of the federal poverty guidelines, which wasn't the case before. So these enhanced health care subsidies, depending on the household's composition and income, could be the equivalent of hundreds of dollars a month for those enrolled in eligible households. There's also, under the American Rescue Plan Act, there's expanded unemployment compensation eligibility and amounts of that additional $300 per week in benefits. Those were funded by the federal government through early September, but they were ended in New Hampshire earlier than that. So they've already concluded in New Hampshire. There's also the increased Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP benefits. So this is the food assistance program, and the amount is about a 15% boost in terms of the top line amount. There are also adjustments that were made based on whether someone was income qualified, how much they would receive earlier in the pandemic. But the top line boost lasts through the end of September of 2021 as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act. There's also increased aid in the Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program, or the WIC program, increased benefits for purchasing fruits and vegetables. And according to the latest I've seen from the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, that goes through June, that goes from June to September of this year in that particular program. Next slide, please, if you would. So there are other benefits as well. There are two on here that I won't talk about much because the stupendous and brilliant Carrie Gladstone will be speaking about them next in much more detail, but know that it's a big deal that there's an expanded earned income tax credit for certain adults and an expanded enhanced child tax credit, which is fully refundable. And there's about half the benefit come in monthly installments. But again, both of those are for 2021 only. Under current statute. There's also rent and utility assistance for certain households with low incomes that has come to the state. That in the American Rescue Plan Act, and this is on top of additional aid from the December aid package for similar uses. That was a significant amount to the state of New Hampshire as well as to Hillsborough and Rockingham counties. There's also the Homeowner Assistance Fund, which Andrew covered much better than I could, but that's another piece of assistance that will end up going to individual households. And an increase to the Child Care and Development Block Grant. And these are relatively flexible funds, but the state may use these for child care subsidies, particularly for low-income households. And there are also some eligibility changes for essential workers, so that's a significant boost as well. And there's added funding for the low-income household water assistance program. This is a relatively new program that's designed to help people pay their water bills, and this was established actually in the December aid package. And since it's new, there's not a long history of people applying for it. There's also the expanded funding for the low-income home energy assistance program. And Margaret, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So a key thing to remember about many of these policies is that they provide economic stimulus. So what you see in this table is economic modeling completed by Moody's Analytics and based on federal policies to respond to the Great Recession back in 2009. The economy was weaker in 2009 than it appears to be now, so these numbers are probably a little bit high for today's economy. But you can see the multiplier effects of $1 of federal benefits invested in different expenditures in this table. The increased SNAP benefits are right at the top of the list. So again, this is the food assistance program. This food assistance really helps get money into local economies. As you can see, for every dollar invested, it was about $1.74 in economic growth in early 2009, according to this modeling. You can see that other familiar policies are on this list as well, such as unemployment compensation, expansions to the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, and more funding for the low-income home energy assistance program. These are all policies that were also addressed in some way by the American Rescue Plan Act. So these policies tend to be more economically stimulative, as this modeling and some other research suggests. If we could go to the next slide, please, Margaret. Thank you. So, as we've discussed, there appears to be a significant amount of need for assistance among New Hampshire residents, particularly those with limited resources. And there are lots of programs, many of which are substantially altered, but almost all of which require action on the part of eligible individuals to be accessed comprehensively. So how can policymakers ensure that residents who are eligible have access to these benefits? The U.S. Treasury Department's interim final rule identifies that funding public benefit navigators is a permissible use of the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. The interim final rule identifies permissible uses to include funding public benefit navigators to assist community members in applying for these public benefit services, services and outreach to promote access to physical and behavioral primary health care and preventative medicine, and funding for community health workers to access health services, as well as other services, including those impacting the social determinants of health, which is a relatively broad array. And the U.S. Treasury Department now pulled quotes directly here from the interim final rule that Commissioner Scott mentioned. The U.S. Treasury Department encourages recipients to consider funding uses that foster a strong, inclusive, and equitable recovery, especially uses with long-term benefits for health and economic outcomes. And the fiscal recovery funds can help address systemic public health and economic challenges that may have contributed to more severe impacts of the pandemic among low-income communities and people of color. Next slide, please, Margaret. So even some of the more automatic programs and changes by the American Rescue Plan Act still require action on the part of individuals to access benefits for themselves and for their communities. And navigators can help individuals work through these programs and in some cases access them while they still exist if they're temporary programs or programs that are boosted temporarily. Connecting residents to these services for which they are already eligible will help more resources flow to local residents' economies, including, some of these benefits are relatively complex. So for example, there's some risk of underuse for the child tax credit for those who do not file taxes typically, who may not earn enough to file taxes. And for the earned income tax credit, there's a risk of underuse for those who are newly eligible. Again, Mr. Gladstone will talk about these in more detail, but the child tax credit might benefit I've seen two estimates of 85 to 87% of children in New Hampshire. So that's a significant swath of the population. And the earned income tax credit could bring in as much as $43 million to state residents, according to preliminary unpublished estimates from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. So again, pretty big impacts. Also, if we look at SNAP benefits, the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, we should just take a look at census data, census survey data from 2019, so before the pandemic, and looked at incomes and to see how many people, especially how many children, might be under-enrolled, as in not enrolled in SNAP, even though they may be eligible. And it was up to 17,000 children in 2019, so again, before the pandemic. If all those children were eligible and were enrolled and were in individual households that received the average benefit for households that year, that would have been close to $38 million more that would have flowed to the New Hampshire economy during 2019, a pretty significant increase in SNAP benefits over what we've seen. And again, think of that multiplier effect. These are dollars that are used in local economies, used with local grocers and at local establishments. Now, One other quick note I want to make is that at some point, the federal public health emergency will end. When it does, the federal requirement that states not disenroll people from Medicaid as they usually have, that requirement will also end. Many people have become eligible for Medicaid and enrolled during the pandemic. People who are enrolled in Medicaid and are still eligible will have to go through processes that may be new to them to remain enrolled. Navigators could also help these individuals and families stay enrolled in Medicaid while they are eligible, potentially avoiding significant healthcare costs to those New Hampshire residents that they might otherwise have to face. So even after many of these programs expire or revert back to their pre-pandemic policies, there are long-term benefits to families and communities when individuals know how to enroll in SNAP, for example, or know how to access Medicaid or tax credits for which they are eligible. Because local economies can benefit collectively, and there are people eligible for these programs in every community in the state, there's a significant opportunity here for both municipal and county collaboration to cover large geographic areas with dedicated benefits navigators. If you could go to the next slide, please. So you can find more information from NHFPI regarding the American Rescue Plan Act and the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Funds on our website at nhfpi.org, including the specific resources listed here. We also examine local and regional economic and demographic trends and publish information regarding those trends periodically. You can see one example of that in the fact sheet published earlier this year showing county level poverty rates and median household incomes. That's at the bottom of this list that you can see on this slide. And NHFPI will continue to publish new resources related to the economic recovery. Next slide, please, Margaret. So you can contact us here, and my apologies for the font being a little wonky, but you could contact us at, here on any of these resources, or follow us on social media to see our resources in your social media feed. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand it back to Margaret.
Thank you so much, Phil. And the wonkiness of the font is on our end, not on your end. So thank you for that great overview of various programs and under the American Rescue Plan Act, and for the plug about the opportunity for municipal and county collaboration on some of these items. There's certainly an opportunity there for that with the state and local fiscal recovery funds. Next up, we have Carrie Gladstone from Granite United Way. What's in the plan? Welcome, Carrie.
Margaret, thank you. And to the organizers of today's event, thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here and talking about, I realize I'm your last speaker and I'm talking taxes. So my job is to make this as fun and exciting as federal tax law allows. And thank you to Phil for setting up a little bit of that, and certainly Patrick as well for talking about how Granite United Way, as part of our work statewide and into Windsor County, Vermont, has a role to increase the financial stability of households and particularly children. And we do that in a number of ways. Patrick described some of them and the role that we can play there administratively. In addition, we are doing some direct service, and that includes 211, as you heard mentioned a few times. We want to make sure anyone who has any sort of a crisis knows that they can dial 211 from anywhere in New Hampshire and be connected to guides who can point them in the direction of everything from some of the things that were mentioned earlier. Andy Catabrett describing foreclosure intervention and other housing needs, food, utility assistance, and yes, other forms of finances that includes taxes. Granite United Way runs the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program for the area that we serve, and leads a statewide coalition to try to get money into the hands of people who are low to moderate income, who may have gone to a commercial preparer. We want to make sure that they're putting that money back in their pocket, and connecting with federal tax benefits that they may not be aware of. And so we've gotten a lot of information. We've learned a lot about those measures over the course of the time that we've been doing VITA. And so we are aware that the American Rescue Plan Act includes two tax credits, the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. Phil mentioned both of them, and he is similarly stupendous and magnificent, as is Andy and all the other presenters. Phil, you and I are the president of each other's fan clubs, but we will go into some of the details of the tax credits and see how you, as municipal and county officials, can connect your clients, the people that you see, local residents, with those federal tax benefits. So the next slide, please. You may have heard about the child tax credit having had quite a bit of change being made to it from ARPA, and that's partly because there were advance payments that are in part of the child tax credit for the first time. Those payments started just earlier this month. So the changes ARPA made, and as was mentioned, this is only for 1 year. So last year, people who filed and claimed the child tax credit had a child under 17 and could get up to $2,000 per child, but could not get the full benefit of that. So let me just pause here and say, for those of you who are not tax nerds like some of us, a child tax credit or any tax credit is really like getting a gift card to help you pay your tax bill. And so there are certain criteria that folks can use depending on the tax credit. The child tax credit is for people who have children. And under the American Rescue Plan Act, it's now children under the age of 18. So 17-year-olds are now included, and it's fully refundable. And here's as much as I will go into tax language about that. If you have a tax credit that is not refundable, the amount on the card, that gift card that I described, will pay the tax bill up to the amount that you have tax liability. And if there's still money on that card, if it's non-refundable, that money just goes away. Under the child tax credit previously, families that qualified could not get full advantage of the refundable aspect of that tax plan. So it was kind of counterintuitive to say that the people at the lowest end of the financial scale could not get the full benefit of the tax credit. That has been changed with ARPA. It now provides a $3,000 tax credit for children 6 to 17 years old. And for children under 6, there's an additional amount for a total of $3,600, and it is fully refundable, meaning if someone has a tax bill and it's paid down to zero, anything remaining on that card is refunded to the taxpayer. And here's what's also new and has been making news. It started earlier this month that advance payments were being made in installments that will go on about the 15th of the month between now and the end of the year, adding up to half of the full child tax credit. So let me pause there and make sure people understand the mechanics of that. So if someone has one child between 6 and 17, they qualify for a $3,000 credit. $1,500 of that will be paid in monthly installments that began this month of $250 per child. And for those with younger children, it's $300 per child per month up until the end of the year. The rest of that is claimed by filing a 2021 tax return that people will do in the first part of 2022. So that part remains the same. Normally, the way people claim these tax credits is by filing a tax return after the year ends. And so people will do that. And there are a couple of pieces that we want to make sure people know about, because there are certain situations where people may not want the advance payments. For example, that shared custody situation where people claim every other year. The tax credit advance payments are made now being based on the 2020 tax return that people filed. And if they listed their kids, they would have gotten returns or the payment based on that. If the 2020 return was not filed or has not been processed yet, the 2019 return would be used. So making sure that folks know that they can qualify for this return, for this benefit. If they think they may owe money in, they may not want to get the advance payment, use all of that credit to pay down their tax bill. But for the most part, people will want to get that advance payment. There were something like 35 million payments that went out earlier this month, so people are already starting to get that. And I want to call our folks on the line, the cities and towns, make sure that your local welfare officers, if they're not already invested in this, know that they can help people. These are the folks who see low-income people front lines every day and want to make sure that they're aware of this. They can go to the IRS website, irs.gov, and they can sign in. There are two portals, two tools that people can use on irs.gov. And if they are people who will not be filing a tax return, they are, for example, not working, receiving only benefits such as disability benefits, they can go to the non-filer tool and make sure that their information, including that of their children, is registered with the IRS, which is distributing these funds. For people who do file a tax return, and even if you're not required to, if your income is below that of the standard deduction, that filing threshold, but you have earned income, you can still file a tax return, still get the benefits, and the income requirement for the child tax credit has been reduced to zero. Prior to this, people had to have at least $2,500 in earned income. So there are a number of people who are eligible for these benefits who may not know it because they don't normally file a tax return. So I want to make sure that your attention is called to this and you can assist people in getting the money that is due them. That's the nuts and bolts of the child tax credit. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the earned income tax credit. This has not been getting as much attention because it's something that doesn't affect as many people, but for the people who are affected, it really provides a significant change that can be a great benefit to a lot of people. According to some of that same preliminary data that Phil saw, about 64,000 New Hampshire residents not previously eligible for the Earned Income Credit are now eligible because of the American Rescue Plan Act. The Earned Income Credit, like the child tax credit, provides a benefit for people to help them pay their taxes. It's for people who are working, but not making a lot of money. And by working, that could be working for someone else. It could also mean that they are self-employed and have some income. And it begins with $1 of earned income. So we want to make sure that even very low earners are taking advantage of that. The earned income credit is a benefit that goes up to about $57,000 for eligibility. And as I say, begins with the first dollar of earnings. And the amount of the credit varies with the amount people earn and the number of children people can claim, from no children to 1, 2, 3 or more. And up until this year, there was a quirk in that eligibility for people who do not have a child to claim, in that they had to be between the ages of 25 to 65. So in addition to that, they had to file a tax return to receive it. And the maximum benefit was only about $500, but still a significant amount. And we know from IRS data that there are a lot of people who are eligible for this credit. About 1 in 4 in New Hampshire are eligible but do not file for the credit. So that's before this change was made. And we want to make sure that people are claiming that, because that's leaving about $49.5 million on the table by some of our most vulnerable residents. And so we want to make sure that those folks who qualify for the Earned Income Credit are aware of and claiming it. Let's go to the next slide and show you that what has been changed under the American Rescue Plan to the Earned Income Credit is that maximum age for eligibility has been eliminated. We know there are many people who are working beyond the age of 65, needing to make ends meet. They are now eligible to claim the Earned Income Credit, even if they do not have a child to claim. For the minimum age, that's been lowered from 25 to 19. And then for certain specialized populations, such as qualified homeless youth or former foster youth, all too often those are the same youth, same young adults, they and others are now eligible to file for and claim the Earned Income Tax Credit, which has been increased to just over $1,500. So talking with, for example, non-custodial parents, younger people. I was doing a presentation to the Merrimack County Adult Diversion Program just last week. And I asked, how many of you are under the age of 25 and working? And some hands went up. And I wanted to make sure that they knew that they are now eligible to claim the Earned Income Credit, whether they have children or not. If they are non-custodial parents, if any of the folks you're working with are non-custodial parents, we hear that they often feel like they cannot bring a lot to the table financially. And now they're eligible for the earned income credit, and that's a significant amount of $1,500. So for any young workers starting out, single or married, based on income limitations, they can get this additional benefit through changes made to the American Rescue Plan Act. So I'm going to ask for the next slide that will have a number of other pieces that we want to make sure that everyone already knows about, because this has been the case for both the earned income credit and child tax credit prior to these changes. Kinship care providers. We hear there are about 10,000 grandparents raising their grandchildren who may not realize that they may be eligible to claim their grandchildren for the earned income tax credit. So the IRS terminology is a qualifying child. That does not have to be your child. In fact, does not have to be a child. A qualifying child can be anyone up to, of any age, who is permanently and totally disabled. So we have seen parents who are working and have an adult child at home who is permanently and totally disabled. They can claim that benefit. Foster families, they can claim their foster children as well. So, it's sort of like tax as a second language. It sounds like English. We know what children are, but qualifying children, to meet the IRS definition of a qualifying child for the earned income credit, is up to age 19 or 24 if a full-time student, or any age if permanently and totally disabled. With people who qualify for the child tax credit, that is up to 18, pure and simple. So for parents of a 17-year-old, if that child is going to turn 18 before the end of the year, the eligibility for the child tax credit goes away. However, that has been increased by 1 year. And we want to make sure that everyone who is eligible, who can claim it, does claim it. Let's go to the last slide, which includes going to the IRS website, irs.gov, where you will find about 12 pages of frequently asked questions pertaining to a lot of situations regarding the child tax credit, as well as those two tools that I described, the non-filer portal and the manage your account portal, which people can use to put in their bank account information so that they can have those advance payments for the child tax credit direct deposited. They should be able to, by this point, add information if, since the first of the year, they've had a child or have adopted a child, that would give them additional child tax credit eligibility. My contact information is up there as well. And I will turn the platform back over to Margaret and see if there are any questions that folks may have, but I'll leave that up there for just a moment before we do that. And so you can get my information and feel free to contact me directly. As I said, in terms of partnerships, Patrick talked a lot about it, but we also want to make sure that you're thinking about some of the nonprofit organizations that you work with, where we could work together to provide outreach to some of the organizations that are serving some of the folks who who I mentioned, people experiencing homelessness, survivors of domestic violence, as well as child welfare agencies, including the Division for Children, Youth, and Families, and private agencies as well. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for this additional information about what's in the plan. And I think that, is part of the goal here for towns and cities and counties to get that big picture view of everything in the plan, in addition to those state and local fiscal recovery funds. And that was a very compelling and engaging conversation on taxes. So thank you for that. And thank you to all of our presenters. Before I move over to Kate to bring us in on the questions that we have pending, I just wanted to mention that you may notice we did not have a section on broadband in this webinar. And of course, broadband infrastructure is one of the allowable uses under the state and local fiscal recovery funds. We are working to bring you a separate and additional resources on broadband infrastructure. And that is why it was not part of this webinar here this morning. So stay tuned for more on broadband.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kate Horgan. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Association of Counties. We just want to thank the Municipal Association for partnering with us on this webinar today. So it is my job to pull together all your questions that you have put into the Q&A and see if we can't get some answers for you. So you may not hear your specific question, but we've tried to pull together similarly themed questions. Eric, I think the first one is probably for you. When can we learn more about how the state plans on spending ARPA funds? And if we want to collaborate with the state, who should we talk to?
Perhaps Eric has stepped away from his computer, Kate. I don't hear him stepping in yet, but I would say that, and I don't know what you think about this, Kate, I would say that a great starting point is going through Gopher, since they're really administering the funds. But I would also suggest that municipalities, counties, local officials look to the particular state agencies. If it's a particular type of investment, you know, if it's water, it's DES, if it's broadband, it's probably BEA, sort of look to the specific state agency that the investment relates to. But of course, you can also reach out to Kate or me if, you know, municipalities and counties are interested in collaboration and are trying to figure out what the next best step is. We can try to be helpful in facilitating that.
Great. Thanks for hopping in there, Margaret. This next one is for you. Who needs to authorize a city or a town to apply for the funds? Is it a vote of the Board of Selectmen, or does it need to be a vote of the entire community?
Does not need to be a vote of the entire community. Typically in, you know, a city with a city manager or a strong mayor, they would have the authority to be the authorized individual to put forward that application. But in a town with a traditional select board, town administrator form of government, it should just be a decision of the governing body, which is the select board, that the town, they wish to go ahead and apply for the funds on behalf of the town. And typically then the town administrator would be authorized to go ahead and fill out that application.
Great, thanks, Margaret. Peter Clark, we have a question for you. One of our attendees noticed that there are federal regulations for the water and sewer pieces. Are there any other federal regulations that are applicable to projects under the local fiscal recovery funds of ARPA?
So, you know, for the water and wastewater, it really comes down to those kind of the eligibility for the state revolving funds. I don't know off the top of my head about other federal you know, rules or guidelines for other facets of the law, but certainly if there are specific questions, we're happy to look into it.
Great, thanks, Peter. And Phil, we actually got several questions about the public benefits navigators, how people access them, where do these people exist? So if you could expand a little on that, that would be great.
Sure, I'll do my best to the best of my knowledge about it. So the public benefits navigator may be employed directly by a government entity, or maybe someone who's working for a pre-existing nonprofit, right? A nonprofit that's already doing this work in a community. So they're, such as Granite United Way, for example, around tax prep work, in particular, in Carrie's, under Carrie's umbrella. So I think that there's a couple different options. There's a couple different models for what a public benefits navigator could look like. Obviously, there's both constraints in terms of available workforce. So there may be benefits in terms of employing someone who's already employed for a nonprofit locally or for another entity locally that's doing this sort of outreach, and providing them with more resources. Or if you're able to hire someone, there's directly, there may be opportunities for collaboration. So if you're a very small community, then you may have quite a few people eligible for these programs, but you may not have, it may not be enough people for a full-time benefits navigator to be just dedicated to your community, for example. And of course, you want to get everybody enrolled, and it's going to be it's a difficult process to do outreach and get everybody enrolled, but it may be worthwhile for communities that are neighboring communities or regional communities to collaborate. There's also a regional economic benefit, so that makes some sense as well. And that's where the counties can play a role here too, is that regional collaboration. Whether there is a dedicated state effort to have public benefits navigators employed at the state level or employed at a regional collaboration level, I don't have knowledge of that at this point. Because I haven't heard anything about that that's particular to a coordinated effort or a multi-jurisdictional effort at this point. That's part of the reason why I think it's an important thing for public officials to remember, because there are a lot of benefits available for individuals that individuals are eligible for and maybe temporarily eligible for now, that they won't know exactly, they may not know if they don't have these public benefits navigators, or again, whether it's community health workers, that's part of it, whether it's tax preparatory help. It doesn't necessarily, a public benefits navigator may be one person who knows enough about all these programs to connect people to other resources, or it may be investments in people who already know about sets of resources and knows enough to maybe do the referral for different sets of resources, whether it's housing or whether it's healthcare or whether it's tax preparatory work. There's already existing organizations that work in some of these spheres, but a public benefits navigator could be someone who works mostly in one of those spheres, but is able to make the connections to others. And there are, again, there are agencies, there are nonprofits that do some of this work already. Right now, there are funds available that can help fund that work and help community members who may be in greater need than they were in prior years access those funds or know how to access those funds. So I hope that answered your question, Kate, and the questions in aggregate that were in the chat, at least to the best of my ability.
Thank you so much, Phil. And it looks like we have time for one more question. And Margaret, I think this one probably falls in your and my court. So we, as always with these webinars, get a lot of questions about specific projects and whether or not they can apply, if ARPA funds can be used for this. And also we've gotten a couple questions about how we can use lost revenue. So I figured we could combine an answer here on those two. I think the best answer we can give you on specific projects is we don't know. We can give you guidance, but we cannot approve or disapprove or unapprove a specific project, and neither can the state or the federal government. They can give you guidance, but mostly they will refer you to U.S. Treasury guidance. So Margaret, I don't know if you want to add to that a little bit.
Sure. And if Eric wants to jump in too, that would be fine. I saw that there were a couple of questions in the Q&A on specific projects, like I think a community center building. Can we build a community center building? Can we put in new bathrooms with the local fiscal recovery funds? And I'll say sort of two things. The first is that the interim final rule, which will soon become the final rule, and will have certainly probably some tweaks in relation to the comments that are being submitted on the interim final rule. But if we look to the interim final rule as our rule on what we're allowed to spend funds on, there are a variety of very specific purposes for which you can spend funds, water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, premium pay, very specific things. But then there's also an eligible use that is called revenue replacement. And what it allows you to do as a municipality, as a county, is to spend your local fiscal recovery funds to the extent of revenue loss on the general provision of government services. And that can include other types of infrastructure and work that is not specifically listed in the water, sewer, broadband infrastructure eligible use. And what this means is for some of these sort of other projects, sort of general things that municipalities would spend money on, buildings they would build, roads they would pave, things along those lines, those become eligible to the extent of revenue loss. And so the starting point there is to do the revenue loss calculation in the way that the interim final rule sets it out for you under the eligible use revenue replacement. So you've got to look at that eligible use, look at the formula for calculating revenue loss, use the calculators, the GFOA calculator, the National League of City calculator that are on the NHMA website, figure out to what extent you've experienced revenue loss under their formula. And to the extent of lost revenue, you have a lot of flexibility in spending your local fiscal recovery funds on just those types of projects that are being mentioned as examples in those questions. So I don't know if Eric wants to say anything further on that.
Sure, Margaret, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, you said it exactly right. The law gives local governments a lot of flexibility in the context of that revenue loss eligible use category. If folks have particular projects or particular uses in mind, please do feel free to email us and ask about it. And what we can do is point you to the specific language in the law or in the accompanying guidance from Treasury that says, yes, you can use the funds for that purpose. Or we'll be frank with you that we're not quite sure and point to that, that revenue loss category. Now, you don't need to have, I'll clarify, you don't need to have projects identified and quotes in place and everything else in order to proceed with applying for the funds. You can apply for the funds without having your project list yet identified or having your projects confirmed as eligible. So please do that first, regardless.
That's great. And that is a good point. I think there's been some question about, do we have to know what we're spending funds on before we apply? And the answer is a big no. You can go ahead and accept the funds and then start doing your planning and implementation and figure out what the right project and investments are for your community. And you have a period of years to do that, not a very, very short time frame like municipalities saw with the CARES Act allocations that were made by the state. Kate, there's one other question that actually a panelist asked that I addressed. So I just want to address it really quickly. The question of who in the town can accept the funds. So let's say they, the funds have been applied for and now they need to go ahead and accept and then expend the funds. There is a statute 3195B that allows towns to adopt authority, allowing the governing body to apply for and accept grant funds, essentially, without going to town meeting. There is a public hearing requirement for doing the acceptance of those funds, but it allows the governing body to do it without needing a town meeting vote. Most towns, I would say, have adopted 3195B, but because there are some towns that have not, House Bill 2, the state budget trailer bill that was signed just a few weeks ago, includes an explicit provision that allows all towns to use 3195B to accept and expend the state and local fiscal recovery funds from ARPA. So please look, if you're a town, take a look at 3195B. That is what you should be following for the acceptance and expenditure of these funds. Thanks, Kate.
Great. And I think we just have one more slide for everybody. It is a resources page, and we will be sharing a copy of these slides with everyone. But these are probably your go-to. So the U.S. Treasury, state and local fiscal recovery funds webpage, New Hampshire Gopher, the Municipal Association, and the Association of Counties. All have resources available for you around the coronavirus and ARPA funds. And we just wanted to thank all of our partners and speakers today. We really appreciate it. And we thank everyone for attending. And we look forward to working with everyone in the future.